Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Issei. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei was the hidden dragon leader? Part 10. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. I couldn't believe my eyes as Murayama put my name on the blackboard to act as Asia's partner. Issei, I hope you don't mind, but I want you to be Asia's partner for the three-legged race. You help the kendo club so much, and I feel like your athleticism would help with Asia, since she's not as athletic as we are, Murayama said cutely. How can I say no to one of my girls? I replied with a relaxed smile. I could do so very easily considering Murayama's reason was a total lie. The truth was that Murayama figured that if I was around Asia more, I'd be more willing to help stop Diodora, who had obviously bad intentions for her. I understood the reasoning, but it was so stupid that I was furious. Thanks, Murayama smiled as she wrote my name on the blackboard. As I looked towards the others, I could see a smile on their faces, and from the looks of it, the others seemed to be in on it. Well, they would pay dearly for that later, but for now I would roll with the punches. The day was nearly over, and although my professor was babbling about something, I was still angry at the girls and going through serious mental gymnastics to keep my killer intent in check. Noticing as much, Drake finally spoke to me. Calm down, partner, and look at it from that girl's perspective. You don't really have a working relationship with the Gremory heiress at all. She's probably worried that you won't help the nun unless you're emotionally invested in it the way that you were with the kendo girls or with your childhood friend. Drake told me. I know all that, Drake, and that's the problem. I replied. My focus broke as the bell for class rang and the day came to an end. I had to do those mental gymnastics again as Murayama walked towards me. Hey manager, are you ready to go? Murayama said with an innocent smile. Go on ahead, Murayama. I've got business to handle first, so I'll be a little late. I replied. The truth was that I wasn't coming, and Murayama would know how annoyed I was with her soon enough. Taking out my frustration with Murayama on the kendo club would be unfair to those girls, even though quite a few of them were masochists. Alright, Murayama replied before leaving with an odd expression. Soon enough everyone was gone, and the only person left was Azazel, who looked at me with a smile that suggested he knew what I was thinking. In case you were wondering, Biku is at my apartment playing video games. I'm sure he could use some company since I'll be busy with the orc. Azazel said knowingly. Good to know, I replied with a respectful nod. I'd love to be more annoyed with Azazel for figuring out what I was planning, but he gave me something to do. It didn't hurt that I liked Biku and he was a good guy. I don't know whether to be happy to see you or be annoyed because it meant something stupid happened, Biku chuckled as we relaxed in Azazel's apartment. When I rang the bell, Biku was surprised but let me in anyway and took me to the gaming room. Think about it this way. I very rarely choose to go home without enjoying my girls, so you should be honored I'm even here. I replied with a flat voice. Yeah, but since you have two sets of girls. That means that if you're angry at one then you can go see the other two. Calm down. If you're here with me that means you're fighting with both at once, which is pretty impressive. Biku replied with a wry smile. Issei figured he could talk it out with someone else and decided to fill Biku in. The girls are convinced that I'll be more willing to help get rid of Diodora if I'm closer to Asia and made me her partner for the three-legged race at school. I shrugged. I mean, that makes sense. You do kinda do as you please when it comes to the supernatural. Biku replied with a flat expression. I winced a bit since that meant Biku agreed with what the girls doing on some level. I understand that, but it's the fact they feel that they need to bribe me to begin with that's insulting. I was always going to protect Asia if for no other reason than she's friends with my other lovers. I admitted. I was brought from my musing when the screen flashed and I was named victor of our latest round of Smash Brothers. I didn't think you'd be this good. From what I hear you spend all your time having sex, Biku cursed. We had been playing as we spoke and I had just taken the win. I play video games when I get the chance since it keeps the mind and fingers sharp. I don't play as much as I used to, but Smash is one of my favorite games to play. So are video games your secret? Biku wondered, referring to how I've managed to keep my girls together so easily, despite being the type of person I am. What fun would it be if I told another guy my secret? I replied with a smirk. It wasn't, but I would let Biku think that for now. Good point. Why don't we get some snacks and play another round? Biku shrugged. Fine by me, I replied until a phone in the room rang. You gonna get that? Nope. It's probably Valerie wondering if you came over. The girl has terrifying instincts when it comes to stuff like that. Biku replied. It was more likely that the girls realized I wasn't at the kendo club or the orc and are calling places I may be. Yes, she does, and luckily for you, no answer is a good answer because it means she'll accept what's going on and stay away. I shrugged before we returned to the game. Valerie is reasonable and I appreciate that about her. Good point. Biku smiled and we played games for another few hours. It was a nice way to calm myself after my annoyance, but despite my anger fading, I was going to make my displeasure known. At night I relaxed in my room, but I didn't want any company, so I set up a powerful barrier that would prevent anybody from coming to see me, including Valerie. It was a skill I picked up years ago to hide my continuous training from my parents, but recently it had been to hide my sexual exploits. My parents have some idea and they don't complain, but it doesn't mean I want them knowing everything I do or don't do. Partner, are you sure this is wise? You know they'll want to speak with you. Yes, I know, but this way it's on my terms. It's why I've locked my room for once also. I smirked. I had a feeling at least one of the girls tried to come visit already and failed. Plus, Irina can come and go as she pleases and she typically does. When she realizes my door is locked, she'll know they messed up and that'll be enough to dissuade them. My stubborn streak was as famous as my sexual history. What about your kendo girls? The spell you cast on them is still active and they'll call for you. They've realized that you won't truly cut them off by this point and that's your weakness. If they call, I'll say that I'm angry with Murayama. I smiled. You're rather cruel. Yes, but Murayama should know better than to test me like that. I figure she'll learn her lesson and we'll go from there. I replied. Sure enough, one of the necklaces activate and when I confirmed it wasn't Murayama, I activated a magic circle to go see the girl in question. Amusingly enough, when the circle faded, I quickly felt a large pair of breasts squish against my chest. Manager Yukame, the girl in question, smiled and I looked down at one of the more interesting members of the kendo club. At this point I might as well Miyuki, especially since you girls keep ignoring what I say and using the necklace for booty calls. I smiled. Miyuki was a short girl with lightly tanned skin, light blue hair that was cut right at her shoulders and brown eyes. Her most notable feature were her high cup breasts, which she bound during competitions but were out in full during the school day. If Haruna was Ria's rival, Miyuki was Kaneko's since they were around the same height, but unlike the flat Nekomata, Miyuki's breasts were around the size of Irina's. Miyuki was the walking definition of an op-eye loli and he was sure Mitsuda hated him because of that. I'm sorry, but I was nervous because you didn't show up today. Especially when Murayama told us you weren't at the orc either. I thought you might have abandoned us again, Miyuki said tearfully. My expression softened seeing Miyuki cry, so I gently kissed her head and wiped the tears off her face. I'm just a little mad at Murayama, so I'm taking a break from the club for around a week. I'll be back after that. Promise, Miyuki said hopefully. Yep. Now get some sleep. I smiled before kissing her on the head again. Okay, Miyuki replied happily. After that I left and went home and relaxed. I hated that I was punishing the girls, but they needed to understand that I was angry at them. It was going to be a long week in the end, but hey, I had to do what I had to do. Since I wasn't going to the kendo club or the orc due to my issue with Murayama, I had nothing to do after school. Fortunately for me, or unfortunately depending on who you ask, my schedule was quickly occupied thanks to two people. The first person was Biku, who was glad to have a video game partner, and the second, to my admitted surprise, was Sakura Gares, who just kept calling me to come see her. What started as me handing over Gundam had become a decent bond and I wasn't about to complain since it gave me something to do. When she asked me why I was so free all of a sudden, I told her about what happened. You're being rather harsh to the girls, Issei. Sakura smiled as she brought me some tea before sitting next to me on her couch in some casual clothes. How do you figure? I replied as I grabbed the remote and played the Gundam video we were watching, wanting to focus on the TV instead of this conversation. Sakura promptly grabbed the remote and paused it again. She hated interrupting her Gundam time, so I knew she was serious. Based on what you told me, Diodora will go after Asia the minute he gets a chance. Having you as a part of the plans to stop him is critical since we know how intelligent you are. Plus we both know that you do as you please. Our relationship is a perfect example, Sakura replied flatly. I groaned because this was quickly becoming a common theme, not you too, Sakura. I groaned. Sakura smiled at my response before surprising me by suddenly straddling my waist. Yes, me, and speaking of our relationship, we have something to discuss. Sakura said with a surprisingly sultry voice. I've invited you over to my home plenty of times and we've spent plenty of time together watching Gundam videos. Are you simply stringing me along like you did Ria's, or is there something genuine going on between us? Sakura wondered. I took a deep breath and smiled. I'm not stringing you along, Sakura. I genuinely think you're a good person and I'm glad to be your friend, I replied calmly. It looks like I'm going to add another supernatural lover to my collection and this one wasn't planned at all. Sakura smiled. Well, in that case, friend. How about we do something you like instead of something I like? Sakura smiled. Alright, but I think we're in the wrong area to do what I like. I said with a smile, grabbing her ass with my left hand to show my approval. Sakura simply smiled and took my hand and got up from her spot on my lap. Then shall we go somewhere a bit more comfortable? Sakura smiled. Lead the way, I said happily, ready to enjoy my other favorite hobby. The Cold War between me and the girls continued for the next few days until the ice was broken in a very interesting way. Asia herself asked me to speak with her and she was distressed from the look on her face. Clearly Asia was bothered by the Cold War and she realized that nothing would change unless somebody did something. I naturally accepted and Asia nodded in understanding. Here we go, I smirked as I teleported to Asia's room, ready for what I fully expected would be a simple conversation. I wasn't surprised to find that the room was basic in every aspect of the word and Asia was sitting on her bed in a green nightgown with white frills. Unsurprisingly, Asia just wanted to know if she was why I had treated Murayama so badly. When I joked about how pure she was, I must admit that I didn't expect the next series of words to come out of her mouth. If I hire you, will you tell me what's really going on? Asia said nervously. I couldn't believe it, she wanted to hire me the same way Yumi did when Riser was still a headache. When she reaffirmed that belief I could only smile, and I even teased that I could and would have my way with her if that's what she wanted. Amusingly she seemed to accept that and I couldn't decide if it was a good thing or bad thing. Ultimately, I decided that there was something else that she could help me with and it was far more reasonable. Your price will be to tell me if a person named Diodora Astereth ever approaches you, Asia. I said calmly, knowing that would serve my purposes much better at this point. You know him too. Asia replied, and that was an eye-opener in a major way. When I asked her to explain, she revealed that Diodora had come to see Asia personally and had seen the girls on their way to school and as a result would be in the crosshairs of a very angry arena. Luckily for me, it went off without incident, but now things were getting troublesome. When she asked me more, I decided to tell Asia the truth about Diodora and his twisted connection to her. Asia was clearly shaken and it appeared as though the final blow was struck on the nun's innocence. Now things were about to get interesting. After I left Asia's, my first move was to teleport over to Murayama's and tell her that her isolation was over, even though the week wasn't up. She wanted to celebrate right then and there, but I figured it would be more fun to do it via our usual spot in the kendo club the next morning, and she agreed. As promised, I went over to the kendo club locker room and opened the door, wondering what would be waiting for me once I closed it. I barely took 3 steps before a naked Murayama gave me a massive bear hug and before long normal service was resumed. Keep fucking me, you stud. God, I miss this dick of yours, Murayama cried out happily as I slammed into her. Yep, it was time for good old makeup sex. You've really missed this, huh? What a pervy girl you are. I smiled as I hammered her from behind with my hands against her breasts as she leaned against her locker. Yes, and I'm your pervy girl. Remind my P who it belongs to, Murayama said happily in an almost possessive voice. The fun continued for a few moments, but my phone vibrated loudly, which was a surprise. You don't have to get that. Just keep fucking me. Murayama cried out. Sadly I do. I replied and pulled out briefly, much to her disappointment. My phone is a resource that practically nobody uses and for them to send me a message could only mean trouble. When I walked over and checked my phone, my annoyance grew, something Murayama noticed as well. Do we have to stop? Murayama wondered, seeing the expression on my face. No, we don't, I replied before focusing my magic and having a second Issei appeared. I told the clone to go to the orc and figured the rest would take care of itself after that. When he left, my focus returned to Murayama. We don't have to be in class until second period, right? Murayama said with an innocent tone that was anything but. Homeroom was dull outside of my good mornings and first period was a boring class that I could skip anyway. Second period was history and sadly we had a test. That sounds about right. I replied with a smile. Good, because you're making up for some of the time you missed, mister. Murayama insisted. My only response was to walk back over to Murayama and slide into her dripping snatch as she howled with joy. Well, this was my life and I wouldn't have it any other way. Well, a little bit less drama would be nice. The next day I noticed there was a letter inside my shoebox when I arrived at school. Quickly opening it, I discovered it was a message from Azazel, which could only be bad news. Come to my office immediately. It was a simple task since, and I walked over to the office of the fallen angel leader and opened the door, ready for anything. Hello, Issei. Seraphol Leviathan said, much to my amusement. Instead of wearing a business suit, she was in a pink costume that was from Milky Spiral, if I remembered correctly. Well, this is a surprise. I figured you'd go bug Sona for something if you were actually in Kuoh. I said with a smile, trying to hide my annoyance. If Seraphol was here, it could only mean one of two things, and neither of them were good. I'm not dumb, Issei. Sona would have been suspicious if I showed up out of nowhere. Seraphol replied. That confirmed it. She was acting most of the time to make people not realize what was going on. An impressive skill, if I was being honest. Given the look on your face, I take it you know why she's here. Azazel frowned. Yep. It's time for Riaz to face Diodora, isn't it? I replied with a groan of annoyance. One of the other reasons I was so annoyed at Murayama and the girls was because I knew that this type of thing was coming. Diodora was simply too troublesome for them to not have a plan in place, and it seemed like it was time to discuss what they did next. That's right. The official announcement won't be until tomorrow, and it means we need to discuss the plan to protect Asia. Azazel frowned. What do you have in mind? I replied with a smile. Riaz wasn't going to like this at all, and neither were the girls. Sadly, there was nothing they could do about it. All they can do is protect Asia and hope for the best. A day later I returned home to find Irina sitting on the couch dressed in some casual clothes. While I had returned to the kendo club, I still hadn't spoken to the orc, and Irina clearly had business to discuss with me. Can we talk? Irina said solemnly. Sure, I nodded. I knew exactly what she wanted to discuss, and I didn't mind since this was just another part of the game. We walked up to my room before I got onto the bed with Irina taking her place next to me. We found out that Riaz is facing Diodora today. Irina sighed. I know. Zaz told me yesterday. I would have told you, but Zaz told me to keep it a secret, I replied. I should be angry at you for not telling us about that, but if Azazel had you keep it a secret, there's nothing I can do. Honestly, I just hate that Asia has to deal with all of this. Irina groaned in frustration. If Irina had her way, she'd have probably killed Diodora. Well, what we can do is work with Riaz to help Asia get stronger and watch over her like you guys have. I replied. The fact that Asia was training was a start. Yeah, but it still sucks. Irina pouted. I could only smile before wrapping my arm around Irina and pulling her into my body. It does suck, but there's nothing you can do. Right now, everyone needs to look after Asia and hope that things take care of themselves. Yeah, Irina sighed as we cuddled until it was time for dinner. After dinner was over, Irina went back home to Zenobia and Asia, and I was left alone yet again. I was relaxing on my bed when a magic circle appeared in my room, and Valerie popped out. Valerie's casual outfit told me she was here for business and not pleasure, which was fine by me. Mind if we talk? Valerie wondered. Sure, just sit on the chair. I replied with Valerie quickly following suit. Tell me, Issei, what do you think Diodora's big plan is? Valerie wondered. That's the million-yen question. I replied. We knew Diodora was after Asia, we suspect he would get the Cows Brigade involved, but there was a huge piece of the puzzle missing. Valerie and I both stood silent for a few minutes before Valerie spoke up. Actually, the million-yen question was. How would he get away after taking her? Continue, I nodded since that was the piece that nobody had figured out yet. Theoretically, he would try to take her sometime during the raiding game, since we've changed her route to school, and she always has a guard of people with her. Unlike with the church, Riaz and the others will be watching her like a hawk just like they are now. If he somehow manages to take her, how will he get away from an angry Riaz and her peerage? Valerie explained. So we have to think of the plan as two parts. Part 1 is how he gets Asia, and part 2 is how he prevents Riaz from getting to her after he takes her. I replied. Valerie was contemplating something before she seemed to get an aha look on her face. Of course. That's why he's working with the Cows Brigade. Valerie exclaimed. Her words sparked something in me, and it was my turn to add to the theory. He's going to use the Cows Brigade as a distraction for Riaz and take Asia while Riaz is distracted. The Cows Brigade's attack will also force Riaz to deal with them, and it would buy him some time to escape. Yes, but here's the problem. We're waiting for the Cows Brigade to attack, which means we'd get backup in short order. Not only would he fail to buy much time, but he was a dead man walking. I scowled. The sour look on Valerie's face told it all, and she was clearly as perplexed as I was. Well, on that note, see ya, Issei. I'm not in the mood tonight, Valerie smiled bitterly. It spoke to how wild this situation was that Valerie wasn't in the mood. Oh well, I wasn't either, to be honest. I would have never guessed that a morning game of Smash Brothers would provide the key to figuring out Diodora's plan, but that's what happened. My opponent for the game was Dr. Mario, and when I watched him absorb my attack and send it right back to me, I realized what Diodora was planning to do. That's it, I gasped as I dropped my controller in realization. The raiding games were done in a separate dimension because throwing around power the way they did would cause too much damage in the real world. Diodora was going to hijack his raiding game with Riaz and bring him to a dimension of his choosing. Riaz would be distracted by the change of venue, and he'd use the opening to take Asia before unleashing the Cows Brigade to serve as the real distraction. That was phase 1 of his trap, and while it was clever, phase 2 was the nasty part. Diodora is smart enough to know that he wouldn't be able to get away with taking Asia for very long. In phase 2 he would find a way to reverse Asia's sacred gear and unleash it on the group coming after him at a time of his choosing, and if he could control the range, the one weakness that would normally arise. He would turn Asia into an unwilling bomb that would slaughter everyone that came to stop him. As Asia was reeling from having killed everyone, he would claim her as he wanted. It was a vicious plan, and a part of me appreciated how ruthless it was. Reaching for my phone, I sent a message to Azazel telling him I had a theory and that we should discuss it later. Sitting in homeroom, I smiled as I awaited the arrival of most of my girls. The Cold War was officially over and in truth the supernatural girls in my life hadn't received much love recently, but that was about to change. A smiling Cadis and Murayama walked in and as usual took their spot on my lap making out with me for 30 seconds before going to their seats. Then in walked Ingvild, Carloman and Yumi who saw me nod and took their spots getting their own 30-second makeout sessions before taking their spot. Finally came Irina, Zinovia and Asia. Irina and Zinovia went over and got their time, but then I was surprised to see Asia come over with a blush on my face. So do you want to turn? I smiled aware that Asia had a decision to make. Would she take the first step in joining the ranks of my harem or would she continue to watch from the outside? The answer ended up being neither as Asia simply straddled my waist and wrapped her arms around me before putting her head on my neck as though to cuddle. I think this is enough for now. Asia replied softly and we simply cuddled for a minute. Considering what she'd been through, I think she needed something like this just to calm herself down. Then again, the match with Diodora was fast approaching and something told me that Asia would need all the courage she could get. Issei would admit that a lot has changed for him in the last year, but today was going to be an experience that surpassed even his wildest imaginations. The Kendo club had their district tournament qualifying rounds today and he stayed behind, so he didn't try to kill Genevieve, with Irina taking over for him, as had been the recent norm. Meanwhile the orc was doing contracts while Valerie's team helped train Asia, and that meant he and Azazel were free to discuss his latest theory. What Issei didn't expect was for Azazel to tell him to meet him at Kuoh's most famous gentleman's club Dark Heaven. The bouncer knew he was coming and brought him in despite his age, and oh was it worth it. It was a wonderful club that was rumored to have gorgeous women of various skin tones, ages and sizes all around him, each walking around in black feathered bras that were barely considered decent and black thongs, which allowed the men at the various booths to appreciate their wonderful bodies. As he arrived at the door to the VIP section, the bouncer opened the door to reveal a sight that would have looked right at home in some of his fantasies. The walls were dark red with shelves filled with alcohol and glasses, while the middle of the room had a large dark black circular couch with a small pathway for people to walk in and out with a large stripper pole in the middle. That's where he found Azazel sitting and smiling in a black suit of his own. So what do you think of my little slice of heaven, Issei? This place is truly amazing. Issei replied before sitting opposite his teacher. The bouncer walked out and they were alone at last. That's good. The Grigori happened to own this little haunt among others and using it for a meeting is always nice. Would you like a drink while we wait for the last person to join us? Who else is joining us? Issei asked immediately. He was nervous about everything and not knowing what was going on wasn't something he enjoyed. A certain VIP is in town and one that would no doubt benefit from knowing about your discovery. So why don't you explain it to me while we wait? Azazel smiled. Right, Issei replied before his expression turned serious. As he explained his plan, he couldn't help but notice that Azazel was surprisingly calm. If I didn't know any better I'd say you figured that out yourself. Something like that was a theory that was being floated around so it's not shocking. It makes me even happier that we prepared ahead of time. Azazel said sheepishly. Should I be nervous or excited? Issei asked eagerly. Both really, Azazel smiled. Alright, and actually I think I'll take you up on that drink. Just some basic sake will do, Issei smiled before leaning back on the couch in order to relax. Azazel got up, grabbed some sake and a few cups before pouring one for Issei. Issei drank his first cup and admittedly enjoyed the taste, but he was barely able to contain himself when the door to their room opened again. This is quite the place, Azazel. This little trip more than worth it and I haven't heard a thing, Odin said with a hearty laugh. Issei was flabbergasted to see the Norse leader. Well, this is a surprise. I never imagined the legendary All-Father himself would join our little group. Issei smiled. He did introduce himself to the man during the Youth Devil meeting, but they didn't really talk since Issei had other plans at the time. He couldn't help but notice his guard next to him was exhausted. If he recalled, her name was Roswis and she was dressed in a simple teal business suit which worked well for her. This cow's brigade of yours is an interesting foe and you're quite fascinating yourself, Red Dragon. Odin smiled. Lord Odin, I believe we were here to discuss business. Azazel said sternly, trying to return focus to the situation. Of course, but I want to enjoy myself, Odin smiled cheekily. Lord Odin, you can have all the sake you want later. Roswis admonished. Oh, relax, girl. Being so serious is why you don't have a boyfriend. Odin chided. Why would you say that, Lord Odin? Roswis said tearfully. Especially when that's not the reason at all. Issei said bluntly just as Roswis started to cry. Really, Roswis said bashfully. Oh yeah. I have a harem of women so large that I can't even count them on both hands, and Roswis, you are more attractive than all but one of them. Issei admitted. The only girl amongst his harem who would surpass the Valkyrie would be Valerie, and he wasn't ashamed to admit it. The only reason you don't have a boyfriend is because of the fact you're the top guard of your faction's leader. I doubt any guy wants to be the one who got the all-father injured because he got into a fight with his only guard earlier in the day and she wasn't on her game. Issei revealed. You've got a point there, boy. Auden smiled. Anyway, we can talk about how lovely your assistant is later. Right now we need to focus on the reason you're actually here aside from the women. Issei smirked. Works for me. Azazel smiled. Same. Auden smiled and the discussion began. Issei enjoyed a little sake and explained what he told Azazel, but eventually it was time to pick up the kendo club and Issei was forced to leave. It was a nice meeting for sure, but Issei was more focused on the fact that he found his next conquest in Roswas. Some would say he was getting too greedy, considering he added Sakvara recently, but he would say he was simply following his desires. He was far too good at that to stop being who he was. After using magic to sober up, Issei teleported to just outside the waiting area before hopping into the limo. The driver simply nodded before closing the door and Issei had a chance to relax. When the door to the limo opened 10 minutes later, Issei was surprised to see Genevieve hop in. What the fuck are you doing here, Genevieve? Issei questioned. He really couldn't understand why she kept coming to see him after what happened. I wanted to talk to you about something, so I convinced Muri to let me come in when you showed up. Genevieve replied. Issei was furious that the girls were doing this, especially since he went out of his way to avoid a meeting with her, but now that she was here, he had no choice but to answer. Talk. Issei said sternly. Genevieve shuddered briefly before gathering herself to talk. Remember how I warned you about Diodora Astareth before? Genevieve asked in order to calm him down, since she knew things were tense between them. Yes, I remember. Issei deadpanned. This was the definition of old news, and she was really in trouble if that was all she had for him. Well, I've learned that Diodora is going to use the upcoming raiding game against Ria's Gremory to go after the nun again. I know that already, Genevieve, so unless you have something of substance to give me, get out. Issei growled. His irritation rising. What about the fact that he has a device that will reverse that nun's healing power and use it to kill everyone that may potentially come to save her? Genevieve added, knowing she was on thin ice. I figured as much. Though since it looks like you haven't given me any information of substance, answer me one question. Issei replied flatly. This was a useless meeting, but he figured he might as well get something from it. But Genevieve replied, slightly taken aback that he was being so lenient. You're a member of the Cows Brigade, yet you continuously give me information that works against them. Why in the world would you do that? Issei wondered. He had threatened more than often to kill her, and yet she kept going. She was on thin ice and she knew that, yet she kept coming to him. I may work for the Cows Brigade, but I'm a girl first. What he did to those nuns is deplorable, and seeing him suffer would make me smile. Genevieve explained. Care to elaborate? Given how calm you are, I take it you know that Diodora's peerage is mainly nuns that he's tricked into his servitude. Yes, I do. Issei replied quickly. Genevieve twitched since this was an opportunity to get back on his good graces, and it was failing miserably. They would be true enemies soon enough, and him not killing her on instinct would be helpful. Well, what you may not know is that after he leads them into ruin, he appears to them as a savior and uses the opportunity to rape them and break their minds. By the time he uses his evil piece on them, those girls are so broken that any thought of betrayal vanishes. Genevieve said bitterly. Once again, I figured as much. Issei groaned in annoyance. When he first learned about Diodora's unique peerage and after he had calmed down, he thought about many things, and one of them was the fact that none of the nuns had betrayed him. As he well knew, fetishes tend to come with sexual desire, and Diodora was more twisted than even he was on his worst day. The fact that none of the girls he went after ever tried to fight back suggested he was manipulating them somehow. Genevieve confirmed one of the theories he had, and it did a nice job of helping her mood. Genevieve breathed a sigh of relief since it was clear he wasn't going to strangle her. Well, I've said my bit. I'm going to go now, and I doubt I'll see you again. I'll hold you to that. Issei replied, and Genevieve Arcana left yet again. As Issei tried to recover from a relatively useless conversation, he was interrupted by a source he never expected. Master Hyoudou, should I inform Lady Citri of your conversation with a young woman? The limo driver spoke up. First off, why are you calling me Master Hyoudou? Secondly, I thought you couldn't hear anything from up there. Issei said calmly. Come to think of it, that was the first time he heard the driver speak since he'd been doing his orgies. To answer your first question, I've always been ordered to treat you with respect by Lady Citri. To answer your second, I normally block all sound once your girls come in because I understood what was going to take place in here. In other words, since they weren't having sex, he eavesdropped. Issei wasn't pleased, but at least the man was being reasonable. I see. Well, don't tell Sona what we spoke about. She will feel obligated to tell Riaz, and that would be stupid. Very well. Oh, and your actual girls have arrived, so I'll be turning off the sound now. The limo driver replied. Sure, Issei chuckled. It was just another aspect of his life that was fascinating, but he would worry about that later. He had girls to please, and a few of them would be getting rough treatment for bringing Genevieve into his orbit yet again. Part of him believed they did it on purpose, but oh well. Issei and Irina didn't arrive back until late at night after the tournament, but thankfully his parents made food for them that they just had to reheat. Irina went over to the house to check on Zenobia, while Issei got changed out of his things into his nightwear. Irina returned with a smile and revealed that Zenobia already ate, so once again it would be the childhood friends all alone. So what did Genevieve want from you? And don't tell me it's sex, because she was walking far too easily for that. Irina smiled as they waited for the food to finish heating up. It went without saying that she had something useful to say because she was walking. Issei didn't want to cause a scene. She wanted to tell me more information about Diodora. I knew pretty much everything she told me, so it was mostly confirmation on my end. Issei replied. And what is it you supposedly know? Irina questioned. If I told you, the chances of you trying to kill Diodora the next time his slimy behind shows up would skyrocket. Given that you're already at your limit in that regards, I'd say telling you would be a bad idea. Issei chuckled. Irina was about to respond, but the oven rang for the food, so she calmed down. This isn't over, Issei. Irina replied, and she went to go get the food. When dinner was over, Irina left since she had a feeling Issei was right and she hadn't recovered from her punishment for allowing Genevieve to speak to him. She would get her answers later, but for now she needed to relax. The next day went by quickly, but Issei decided to go over to the orc to check on Asia. So how's training going? Issei wondered. Asia is progressing well, but sadly we won't have her ready in time to do anything. Valerie replied calmly. I see. Issei replied with a smile as he looked towards the nun. She was an innocent girl who was brought into a game she didn't belong in. Now she would be forced to suffer, and she was taking it surprisingly well. So are you here for business or pleasure? Valerie wondered with a smirk. Neither. Issei smiled. Really? Valerie said skeptically. Yes, really. Issei replied before Irina and Zenobia made space for him on the couch, and he promptly sat down. Well, anyway, since you're here. Ria started to say before a magic circle appeared in the middle of the room. I've got a bad feeling about this. Issei thought to himself, and when Diodora himself popped into the room that feeling worsened. Diodora, Ria said angrily. Issei knew this would end badly, so he quickly put a hand on Irina and Zenobia before glaring at Valerie to calm down. It worked, but he doubted it would last if the young man acted stupidly. I've come to make a request of you, Riaz. Diodora said calmly. What is it? Ria said with gritted teeth. She was on the verge of exploding, and Issei slowly got up to prevent that from happening. I'd like to make a trade with you. The nun that once saved my life, Asia Argento, is a member of your peerage. I'd like to trade for her in exchange for one of my bishops. Riaz was absolutely livid, but before she could say something, Issei appeared in front of her and pulled Riaz into a heated kiss. Ria's anger was pushed to the side as she enjoyed the kiss, and after he was sure she was relaxed, Issei pulled away. And now calmer, Riaz simply said, sorry but no. My peerage is my peerage and I wouldn't trade them for anybody. She knew Issei did that to calm her down, and she understood why. Diodora was a piece of work and nothing good would come from trading her to him. I see. Well, have a nice day and I look forward to our battle. Diodora replied without protest. Alright, Riaz replied calmly as Diodora left via a magic circle. When he was gone, the tension in the room vanished for the most part. Issei, why did you stop us from doing something? Irina said angrily. Because we know Diodora will try something scummy soon, but we can't kill him just yet. Believe me, Diodora is as good as dead. Issei replied firmly. I hope so, because it's getting harder and harder to hold back. Riaz insisted. I understand. Issei replied. He wasn't too thrilled with Diodora either, but the battle was coming in a few days. They would have calmed down, but the door burst open. Is everything okay? It was brief, but I sensed a massive killing intent. Bhikkhu said nervously. We're fine, Bhikkhu. We just had an uninvited guest show up and Valerie and the others weren't thrilled. Issei smiled. That must have been some guest. For a minute I thought Issei's curse had returned. Le Fay said calmly from behind Bhikkhu. Issei couldn't help but notice she was in Kuoh's uniform and it fit well. Well, Diodora isn't exactly our favorite person. Issei replied. I see. Bhikkhu replied before taking a glance towards his master. Yeah, so go back to training. Tell the others it was just a minor incident. Valerie ordered. Got it, Bhikkhu replied, and he and Le Fay left. You know they're going to want answers, right? Issei said with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, but I'll deal with that later. We all need to relax for a bit. The day before the battle had arrived and Issei was relaxing in his room waiting for the night's fun to begin. Irina was over for dinner, but surprisingly so were Asia and Zenobia, and Issei had to wonder if it was finally time to make the nun his. So am I about to add Asia to my collection? Issei wondered. I'm not sure. The nun has become closer to you recently, so the chance is there, but are you sure that's what you want? At this point what I want doesn't matter. Honestly, I wouldn't have put it past Irina and the others to have planned this result anyway. Issei smirked. Soon the door to his room opened and Asia arrived. May I come in?" Asia said timidly. Of course, Issei smiled. As Asia walked in, Issei could tell she was nervous. "So what next?" Asia wondered. "That's up to you. You clearly came to visit me for a reason." Issei replied. "I guess I was just nervous is all." Irina said that when she's nervous she comes to you. Asia smiled. That little Issei thought to himself. Well, Irina is rarely nervous and if she does, she just comes in and cuddles with me. Issei smiled. Asia blushed at the implication, but understood what she had to do. "Alright then." Asia replied and she went over to the bed and curled in with Issei before falling to sleep in short order. "Rest up, Asia. A lot will be decided tomorrow." Issei replied with a smile before going to sleep himself. The day of the battle had arrived and everyone was ready to go. Asia had already teleported over to the clubroom, so Issei, Irina and Zenobia were getting ready at his house. "Today's the day, huh?" Irina groaned, dressed in her church battle uniform with her blade by her side. Zenobia was ready but kept Durandal in its pocket dimension for the moment. "Yes it is, and I'm ready." Issei smiled, choosing to go with the outfit he used at the youth devil meetings without the cape. "Well, you'd better be. Though I get the feeling it won't be as simple as we'd like." Irina frowned. "Yeah, I agree. So you want me to go deal with our guest?" Issei smiled viciously, having sensed somebody approach. Irina frowned, having sensed the same thing Issei did, and remembering the unique signature. "Go ahead, Zenobia, and I will meet you at the clubroom." Irina shrugged. Issei was hungry for a battle, and the person waiting for them outside would sate his hunger. The smiling Issei walked downstairs and outside just to see a familiar silver-haired priest waiting outside in exorcist robes and with that familiar cackle on his face. He was kind enough to at least put a barrier around the area so nobody would interfere, which suited Issei nicely. "Long time no see." Fried smiled happily. "It has been a while, Fried. I'm a little curious why you're here." Issei deadpanned. He had a good idea of why, but Fried loved to talk so he'd let him. "Well, I was planning to grab that little nun for a certain pervert, but she's not here. I figured I'd kill some time with you in the meantime." "So Diodora knew Asia was here, huh?" Issei chuckled. "Bingo. He was pretty sure you guys had him figured out when he first showed up, and when he realized you guys had changed your route he knew for sure something was up. He figured out where she was, but since you were nearby, he couldn't do anything. Kid's a bloody coward, which is a shame, but oh well. Yet here you are." Issei smiled. "I figured I could delay you for a little bit and have some fun in the meantime. You guys exposed him so his secret is out, and he honestly gets off on having his secret revealed, so he's pretty pissed." Issei appreciated Fried's honesty as well as the fact that he was coming to him. "So since you have this pretty little barrier, I'm assuming we're going to fight, huh?" Issei smiled, recognizing that Fried blocked the area off from others. He could appreciate that in truth since it made his life easier also. "Yeah, but let me get into something a bit more comfortable." Fried replied before his body seemed to expand as though he was transforming. "Well, this should be interesting." Issei smiled as Fried's skin turned dark brown and he resembled a chimera. Fried cackled before charging Issei. "It's a real shame, Fried, because you won't even be a warm-up." Issei smiled before vanishing behind him in a show of speed. But the Fried cackled just for Issei to put his hand on his back. "Dragon shot," Issei said calmly, and the blast pierced Fried from behind, blowing a hole through his stomach that would put an end to his life. "That was boring. I hope Diodora proves to be a better opponent than this." Drake wondered. "Yeah, I agree." Issei groaned before activating a magic circle to contact Azazel. They would be slightly delayed by this, but the keyword is slightly. Kuoh Academy. While Issei was dealing with Fried, the Gremory group along was making their final preparations for the big event. "So where's Issei?" Riaz wondered. "He stayed behind because we had a guest wanting to start the party early. I think it was that priest Fried that escaped with Kakabiel." Irina mused. "What?" Riaz exclaimed. "Those two fighting in a residential area could be a big problem." "Don't worry. Ironically, the guy put a barrier up, so once Issei kills him he'll contact Azazel, and that'll be it," Irina said dismissively. Riaz sighed in relief, but now her focus was back on Diodora. "Alright, and that means I can focus on the battle. You do realize that there's no way you're going to have an actual rating game, right?" Irina reminded her. "Yes, I know, Irina. I'm not as stupid as Issei thinks I am. I know that the chances of us having an actual rating game are slim to none. The question is, should we bring Asia along?" Riaz replied. "That's up to Asia. We know Diodora is going to target her, and that means the decision on what to do should be hers," Irina suggested. The group looked towards the nun who was in her old habitat and ready to go. "I want to go. It's time to confront my past," Asia insisted. "Diodora is the one who ruined her life and she wanted to stand up to him." "Well said, Asia." Valerie smiled, shimmering into existence. "You really need to stop doing that, Valerie," Ingvild commented. Maybe so, but if you don't mind I'm going to steal your bishop for a second. Valerie smiled. What for? Ria said skeptically. It's a secret. Valerie smiled before dragging Asia into another room. A few minutes passed and Asia returned with a determined look on her face. Sorry about that, Lady Riaz. Let's get going. Asia said firmly. Alright, Ria said skeptically. Something about the whole thing bothered her, but Valerie wasn't to say. She wasn't going to do something behind her back. A few minutes later Grafia appeared to take her to the battlefield and it was time for her to go. As she vanished into the magic circle she wondered what the upcoming raiding game would bring. As for the smiling Valerie, she looked towards the other room and smiled. You can come out now. Valerie smiled, referring to the side room that she dragged Asia to just a minute ago. As the blonde-haired figure walked into the room, Valerie couldn't help but chuckle at the way things had played out. This battle was going to be fun. As LeFay Pendragon walked into the middle of the room, she couldn't help but smile. To think she rejected our offer. LeFay said happily. Tell me about it. Valerie smiled as she recalled the conversation between her and the nun just moments ago. Flashback. Valerie led Asia to a private room in the Orc and waiting for her was something that surprised her. Wait a minute, that's me. Asia gasped. In the middle of the room was a perfect visual duplicate of Asia that even had her sacred gear. Not quite, the person replied before a magic circle appeared under the fake Asia and a white light revealed the real identity of the faker. The fake Asia gasped. Yep. I'm here to make you a very simple offer, Asia. We know Diodora is going to find a way to take you, so I can take your place when you do. If I do that, you'll be safe and so will everyone else. What do you mean everyone else will be safe? Asia questioned nervously. According to a source, Diodora is planning to use a special device to reverse your power and use it to attack everyone who goes to stop him. If I take your place, that won't happen. LeFay explained. Asia was shocked that Diodora would go that far, but quickly gathered herself. No. I want to be there from the beginning. Asia smiled. Valerie was pleased to see that Asia wanted to confront Diodora herself. In that case, would you like some backup? Valerie replied as she was about to reach into her pocket. Hold on, Valerie-sensei. You did your best to teach me everything you could and I want to use that training to confront Diodora. I want to show Diodora I'm more than just the holy maiden. Asia said firmly. Alright, Valerie replied. So, should we head back? Asia wondered. Yes, but first let me give you a good luck charm. LeFay smiled as she tapped Asia's wrist. Asia could feel something happen and smiled. Thanks, LeFay. Valerie could appreciate the girl's friendship, but it was time to get going. Let's go, Asia. Riaz is waiting. Valerie smiled. Present time. Now we're just waiting for Issei to get done with whatever is taking him so long. Valerie frowned. He'll be done with Fried sooner or later. Honestly, I'm kind of annoyed he didn't let me kill him. Irina chuckled. A few minutes later and a magic circle appeared revealing Issei and Azazel. What took you guys so long? LeFay questioned. Since you were hiding you probably didn't hear about it, but our psycho priest buddy Fried came by the house. Diodora knows he's exposed and that means he's gonna be extra careful. Issei said nonchalantly. Just great. Valerie groaned. Don't worry about it, Valerie. My good luck charm will make sure Asia is just fine. LeFay smiled. Yeah, but if Diodora knows what's coming he might change his plan. Valerie frowned. If you gave her the spear, she'll be fine. What spear? Issei wondered. Valerie reached into the pocket of her leather jacket and revealed a golden dagger with a purple jewel. This is the spirit of the Dragon King Fafnir, and I was going to give it to Asia to help her out, but she was determined to fight using our training. That's good news for you, Valerie. The price for borrowing the spear was pretty steep. Be quiet, Oz. Since she didn't use it, I'm okay, Valerie said hastily, causing Issei and LeFay to look at her funny. We can discuss what Valerie may or may not have had to do later. How about we get ready to join the party? Issei smiled. Fine. Valerie blushed, glad for the change of topic before giving the spear back to Azazel. Let's go. Azazel smiled as he put the spear away before activating a magic circle to take the group to where Diodora was. Battlefield. The group have arrived on the battlefield just as Diodora flew away with Asia towards a castle in the distance. Looks like he got Asia. Issei frowned. The battle was already underway and Diodora's buddies had attacked, but before they could join the party it was information time. How'd you let her get taken, Riaz? Valerie exclaimed, chiding Riaz for her failure. He snatched her when we were distracted by the troops. Riaz pouted. The fact she allowed Asia to be taken despite knowing this was coming was embarrassing. What would you do without me? LeFay smiled before snapping her fingers. Out of nowhere a magic circle appeared and out popped Asia. Asia? Riaz cried before engulfing the nun in a hug. Lady Riaz, what's Asia started to say before LeFay interrupted. I put a spell on your wrists that would anchor you to me and I just activated it. LeFay smiled. I see. Asia smiled. I hate to interrupt, but weren't you guys supposed to back us up? Auden smiled as the Norse leader appeared out of nowhere. We should go. Valerie sweat dropped. Is that odd? And Ria said in disbelief, having just noticed the old man. Yeah. Valerie said sheepishly. Enough about the old man. We have a battle to win. Issei smiled before activating his balance breaker. He's right. Good luck, Ria's Valerie smiled before following Issei into the air. Good luck, Arena smiled before she and Zenobia activated their dragon wings and soared towards the battlefield, leaving Ria's and her peerage alone. Those guys are something else, Ria's thought to herself as she watched the group go before her focus turned towards dealing with a fuming Diodora. The good news was she knew exactly where he was waiting. Let's go guys, Ria's smiled. Right, everyone shouted and they moved towards Diodora. Ria's and her group stood in front of the entrance to the castle, where a no doubt fuming Diodora was waiting. Diodora, here we are. Ria shouted, wanting to make it clear they were here and ready. I don't know how you managed to take Asia back, but I assure you, Ria's, that she'll be mine again soon. Diodora replied, the anger in his voice hard to miss. You say that, but I won't make the same mistake twice. Ria said confidently. Perhaps, but seeing as how you're here, we might as well enjoy our raiding game. Through this door are two paths. My pawns and rooks are on one side while my queen and bishops await on the other. And what about your knights? I'm surprised you'd put your queens and bishops first instead of the knights. Ingvild said with a little snark. I have my reasons, Diodora snarled back. Well, we'll worry about that later. Don't worry, Diodora, we'll crush your servants. Ria said confidently. We'll see, Diodora cackled. Ria's looked at her group calmly. Ingvild, Zenobia, Yumi, take out the pawns and rooks. Kaneko, Asia, Gasper, you're with me and Akeno. Ria's instructed. Sounds good. They need to pay for what they did to Asia. Ingvild scowled. Let's go, Yumi said with a sadistic smile of her own. Ria's and her group stood in front of the three members of Diodora's peerage, with a frown on her face. She couldn't see them at all due to their large cloaks, but that didn't matter. Sorry, but you're not going anywhere. Ria said confidently. One of the figures came forward and tossed off her cape, revealing a slender woman with olive eyes and silver hair that flowed down her body with two emerald hair clips by her ears. Her outfit consisted of an ocean blue sleeveless vest top with matching cape over a white dress that covered part of her breasts. My master will be taking that girl. The woman replied, staring at Asia with a hateful glance. We'll see. Ria scowled as she and Akeno stood in front ready to fight. Ingvild's group, Ingvild, Zenobia and Yumi approached the pawns and rooks with a smile on their faces. Each girl adored Asia and they wanted to make him suffer for what he attempted to do. Hey girls, mind if I finish them off? Save your energy for the knights. Ingvild said confidently. You sure? Zenobia wondered. Yep, Ingvild said confidently as she looked towards the group. As the pawns charged, the Leviathan heiress focused her magic as a massive circle appeared beneath the girls. This is gonna hurt, Zenobia smiled. Oh yeah, Yumi nodded. It was easy to forget sometimes, but Ingvild could easily be an heiress herself and she had some serious power behind her. Diodora's group was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Wrath of the Sea God, Ingvild shouted, and a tsunami of water shot up from the circle and it was aimed right at the stunned pawns. Should we be concerned about getting wet? Yumi wondered. Ingvild looked at her with a smile. Nope, the circle acts as an isolation barrier of sorts, so only things outside the circle get attacked. Phew, Yumi replied as the tsunami overwhelmed the stunned pawns. It was a decisive victory for them, and Ingvild proved her worth. Battlefield. Not bad, Ingvild. Issei smiled as he saw Ingvild's attack even from a fair distance away. Looks like Ria's got herself a live one. Valerie smirked as she dodged another attack. Ingvild is the descendant of a Leviathan. That type of power should be expected. Issei deadpanned while doing the same. I know that, but that's a really powerful attack. When did she learn it? Irina wondered. Secret training, my guess is she recruited Grafia for help. She is known as the strongest queen for a reason. Valerie smiled. Makes sense, Issei smiled before focusing on the soldiers attacking them again. Using his speed, he quickly got behind one and used a point-blank dragon shot to finish the job. Hey Valerie, when's the big boss coming? Biku spoke up. Biku, please don't jinx it. Valerie groaned. Things were going so well and she didn't want anything to ruin it. But I mean seriously. They haven't sent anybody dangerous and you know shit. Biku cursed as a magic circle appeared. Damn it, Biku, Valerie groaned. Well, now the battle is about to begin. Issei smiled. Ria's group. Over with Ria's. The battle was proving to be more difficult than Ria's thought. She and Akeno were struggling to beat the queen who was being protected by the bishops. They tried Gasper's time-stop spell, but the queen attacked him before he could activate his eyes. Kaneko was currently guarding the weakened Gasper and they wanted to save Asia's healing for later. If then we'd better up our game. Akeno smiled as she upped her output. Right, Ria's nodded before doing the same. That's useless, you know. The queen cackled as the attack failed to get around the bishop's shield. I can't believe it. Ria scowled. She was being held off and it wasn't good for her pride. Well, believe it, Gremory. We're going to win this battle and then that little nun is ours. The queen chuckled. Ria's was furious because she was trapped again. What do we do to overcome her? Riaz questioned. I don't know, Riaz said angrily. Out of nowhere the roof collapsed and a torrent of water slammed the queen and bishops, throwing everything off. What the hell, the queen gasped, unsure of what was going on. Looks like Ingvild saved me, Riaz pouted, furious that she couldn't overcome them alone. Who cares? Now we win, Akeno shouted. Riaz smiled, and she and Akeno fired their attacks, winning the battle for their team. Riaz and Akeno joined up with the other team, ready to face their next opponents. Sorry about that, Lady Riaz. I was so angry that I may have overdone it with my attack. Ingvild said bashfully. Don't worry too much, Ingvild. Your attack saved the day. Issei smiled, appearing out nowhere. Hold on. Weren't you fighting with Valerie? Yumi questioned. I'm actually a clone that was sent as backup. Riaz pouted at that. Do you have that little faith in us, Issei? Riaz pouted. To be fair, I was created a day ago, and I've been waiting with your brother, so I have no idea what's going on. The clone shrugged. My brother? Riaz said in confusion. Yep. If it wasn't already obvious, we've been preparing for Diodora to pull something for a while with the raiding game. Since we knew he wouldn't use the original field, I stood with Surziches, and when he took you the fake field, I was to come in and save Asia before Diodora could implement his plan. I was actually about to sneak attack him when what I suspect was Le Fay's spell took Asia from right under his nose. So why are you here now, Yumi wondered. Theoretically his job would be done. Well, I wanted to see what you guys would do, and I'd step in to make sure you were at full power when you confronted Diodora, since I was sure he wanted to weaken you before the big fight. Riaz frowned. In other words, this Issei was a failsafe, and now he was backup. Yufufufu, I hate to ruin your fun, Issei, but we were already resting Diodora's opponent. Akeno smiled before motioning towards Asia. Is that so? Issei said with his eyebrows raised. He certainly didn't see this one coming. Yes, Asia said with a determined look in her eyes. Issei smiled. Very well. I do want to watch this, so I'll join you guys, but don't expect me to do any fighting. Fine by me, Riaz smiled as they walked towards the next room. Opening the door to the room that held Diodora's knights, Riaz had no idea what to expect, but it didn't take long to throw her for a loop. Keep going. Yes. A female voice shouted, stunning the group. Why is somebody having sex in here? Zenobia spoke up. Yufufufu, let's find out. Akeno smiled and they made their way through until they found the source of the noises, and boy was it a sight to behold. Off to the side was young boy with light brown hair, but given the hole in his stomach he was dead. As for the source of the noise, it was a naked young woman with grey hair and a ponytail, and she was getting railed from behind by somebody with black hair. Interestingly enough, that person wasn't Diodora. You won sooner than I thought, the young man smiled and turned towards the group. And I thought Fried was a cockroach. The clone groaned in annoyance. It's been a while, Red Dragon, and it's a pleasure to meet you, Gremory family. I'm sorry that I could arrange a proper greeting, but I wanted to get my payment first. The young man replied while continuing to thrust inside the naked girl. We'll be right back, Riaz said bashfully, and the group went outside. Once they were out and the door was closed again, it was question time. I thought you killed that guy, Zenobia spoke up. So did I, hence why I called him a cockroach. The clone replied. Who is here? Riaz said, nervously unsure of what to make of the whole situation. His name is Kanya, and he was the one who kidnapped the kendo club during their beach outing. Oddly enough, last time the boss saw him was when he blasted a hole straight through him. That should have ended his life. Speaking of which, I think the boss will enjoy this. The clone smiled before focusing his magic into a circle. I'm a bit busy. The real Issei replied. What if I told you that jerk from the beach was back? The clone replied. On my way, Issei replied, and moments after the call ended the clone vanished. Well, that was strange, Riaz said calmly. Actually, no, it isn't, Zenobia spoke up. How so? Akeno asked with intrigue. Issei absolutely hates that he got the kendo club involved with the supernatural, and this guy is responsible. Zenobia revealed. They couldn't blame Jean since she had no idea. And yet he didn't erase their memories. Riaz questioned again. Because despite everything that happened, they accepted things for how they were. The real Issei replied as he walked towards the group. When he heard Kanya was here, he zoomed towards them, hence the short time to wait. Really, Riaz said skeptically. They basically told me that a dragon shouldn't abandon his treasure, and if I was so concerned then find a way to protect them. They had a point, and thus I made a necklace that they could use if they were in danger. And yet they usually use it for a booty call. Zenobia spoke up, causing Riaz and Ingvild to blush. You're surprisingly relaxed, Issei. Given what he did, I thought you'd be out for blood. Ingvild wondered. Last time we met I beat the hell out of him. There's no way the guy can stop me. Issei smiled. I see, Ingvild replied knowingly. So, how's the battle over there? Riaz wondered, deciding to focus on something else. Basically over. Riaz's brother killed some elf-haired dude named Crusarius Madius. The rest of the troops are being beaten the hell out of by Valerie and her team. Issei smiled. But Riaz said with relief. This battle was over and they achieved a solid victory. Now it was simply a matter of crushing this guy and Diodora. But since we're waiting for Konya to finish and get dressed, care to explain why you didn't think to use Asia's earth magic to disrupt the bishops when Gasper's time powers failed? Issei wondered. His clone was watching the battle and he was pleasantly disappointed when Rias didn't use Asia's earth magic. Ria's eyes widened. I sort of forgot Ria's side. Before Issei could respond, the door opened and Konya revealed himself. Sorry about that. Diodora offered me his 2 nights to do with as I please. I killed the boy and I just finished with the girl. She left this world with a smile. Konya said with a sneer. You're as pleasant as ever. Issei snorted as he walked in with the Gremory group cautiously behind them. To be fair, my role was originally to meet the Gremory and taunt them about what he did to Asia, but when he realized you knew all about him, I simply became an extra body. In case you were curious, I left the hero faction after my defeat and became contracted help. So, what now? Rias wondered. This was almost too easy. Well, I've had my fun and seeing as how the red dragon is here, how about he entertains me while you confront Astaroth? Konya joked. I've got a better idea, Issei smiled viciously, but stop, Konya started to say before a hole appeared in his stomach. How about this time you stay down? Dragonic barrage, Issei replied coldly before a series of dragon shots turned Konya into Swiss cheese, ending his life just like that. Ruthless Ingvild gasped. Now where were we? Issei smiled. Confronting Diodora. Rias smiled. Luckily for us he's right behind door number 1. Issei smiled as they looked towards the curtain which came up to reveal Diodora. Good help is so hard to find, Diodora sneered as he sat on a throne room looking down on the group. It would be easier if you knew how to treat the help. Issei retorted. Enough. Rias yelled angrily, her focus on Diodora. I forgot you were there, Rias, and it seems Asia decided to come back to me after all. Go to hell, you bastard, Asia yelled, surprising the group. Telling a devil to go to hell ain't exactly an insult, Asia, Issei teased. Not now, Issei. This man ruined my life and I'm going to make him pay. Asia yelled. The smiling Diodora walked towards the group with a smile. How could I ruin your life when you didn't have any to begin with? Without me you would have been the church's little doll, healing whoever they wanted you to. They kept you naive, Asia, because you were easier to use that way. Diodora cackled. Shut up, Asia whimpered, the emotions of the moment getting to her. But it's true. If I hadn't stepped in, you'd have lived in isolation with the only people to see you be those the church wants you to heal. The fact you didn't even know enough to recognize what I was made it all the easier to ruin you. Diodora cackled. Shut up. Asia yelled, her anger growing. I mean, think about it. You were a holy maiden loved by all and cherished by all. And yet all it took to ruin that was little old me catching you off guard. I said shut up. Asia yelled, and a burst of golden magic energy seemingly appeared out of nowhere, catching everybody off guard. Incredible, Ingvild yelled out, not expecting the level of magic to appear that did. There we go, Issei smiled. It was easy to forget due to her timid nature, but Asia actually had a fair bit of magic behind her. She would need it in order to heal as many people as she did. What's this? Does little Asia want to fight me herself? Diodora cackled. Yes, and for what you did to me and the others. I will make you pay. Asia screamed out. She was out for blood and she was going to get it. Diodora was outnumbered and he was overmatched, but none of the Gremory peerage and even Issei himself had any interest in helping Asia. This was her fight, and even though they could have backed her up and arguably should have, they watched the nun radiate magical energy as she prepared to face the man who ruined her life. Go get him, Asia, Rias thought to herself, and her peerage was thinking something similar. Balance breaker, Issei shouted as his balance breaker appeared, catching everybody off guard. Issei, what do you think you're doing? Asia said with a bit of anger in her voice. Issei found the whole thing amusing, but kept his calm as he put his hand on her shoulder. I'm not going to stop you from getting your revenge, Asia, but let me remind you of something important. What? Asia growled. She was out for blood and this wasn't the time. You've been dealing with your powers for a few weeks, while this guy has been fighting battles for much longer. I'm sure Valerie is an excellent trainer, but you can't get around this difference in experience. So what? I'm still going to make him pay. Asia roared. Then as your partner, how about I give you some assistance? Issei smiled, a devious plan forming in his mind. Boost X10. What are you, MMPH? Asia gasped as Issei kissed her lips before his real plan was revealed. Transfer. Issei's boosted power flowed into Asia, and the nun's power skyrocketed. Since it was Issei's power that was boosted instead of Asia's, it would help her even the odds. Why you? Diodora growled. Kissing her in front of him was bad enough, but the knowledge she was boosting his power was not a pleasant one. Issei pulled away with a smile. Now go get him, Issei cheered as he backed away. Asia took a moment to take in the new boosts and smiled as she felt the power flow through her. Part of Valerie's training was how to focus and stabilize. If Asia didn't know any better, she suspected that Valerie knew this would happen and prepared her for that possibility. Once her magic was stabilized, she focused on Diodora before activating a magic circle, changing from the Kuoh uniform she was wearing before into the nun habit she wore during her time at the church, without the veil hiding her face. You wanted the holy maiden Diodora, well, you got her. Issei scowled. Be careful what you wish for, Issei dear. Stronger maidens than you have tried to defy me, and they all failed. Diodora roared as he fired a blast of energy at her. He was pleasantly surprised when Issei deflected the attack. HMPH. That's all you've got, Issei replied as she reached out and cast a magic circle of her own with her right hand. Oh, what are you planning to do with that? Diodora smiled. You'll see, Issei smiled. Diodora frowned but got his answer when he sensed the earth rumbling beneath him, forcing him to take to the sky in order to avoid a set of earth spikes that would have skewered him. Not bad, Diodora chuckled. I'm not done, Issei roared as she used her left hand to cast another magic circle. But the Diodora gasped as he fell to the ground towards the spikes. Gathering himself quickly, he blasted the spikes away and avoided a grim fate. Gravity magic, Riaz gasped, not expecting that. When did Issei have the time to learn all of this? Zenobia gasped. I didn't watch her sessions with Valerie, so I don't know, but she must have taught her these. The thing is, they've been training for a few weeks, and gravity magic takes a lot of time to master. Riaz explained. This was incredible. She was a natural when we worked on magic before, so maybe she's just that skilled. Akeno recalled. Who would have thought those books on magic would come in handy all those years later? Issei smiled viciously, answering the question everybody asked. But Diodora growled and Riaz and the peerage looked. Issei smiled happily. I lived in isolation and I couldn't read the Bible all the time, so I asked one of my retainers to get me a book on magic. He agreed and I was able to learn quite a bit. Sadly, I wasn't really asked to fight, so I never got to use it, but now I can put it to good use. That explains it. Issei smiled. You've got some more bite than I thought. Diodora said with gritted teeth. Tears of frustration being let out at once. Thanks for being an outlet. Issei smirked. Well then, I guess I'll have to change things up. Diodora smirked, charging Issei himself. Her magic might be stronger than he thought, but there was no way she had the physical strength to face off with him. Oh no. Riaz gasped. Issei was never going to be a close quarters fighter, which meant she was in deep trouble if somebody actually tried CQC. I hoped you'd do that, Issei smiled as she moved to Diodora's side and reached for his shoulder. Reversal, Issei shouted. AGHHH. Diodora seemed in pain as he felt a powerful burn on his shoulder. Man. This chapter was heavily inspired by Redo of Healer, and I had to do everything in my power not to give her Kier's powers, or this wouldn't be much fun. I settled for reversal magic as both a way of giving her a close quarter style, but also because of what Diodora was attempting to do. Now on with Issei's revenge. Issei simply moved away, giving herself some space before smiling at Diodora. How do you like my new trick, Diodora? Combining reversal magic with my sacred gear allows me to do serious damage. I'm sure your shoulder is feeling pretty rotten right now, Issei smiled. You little brat. Diodora growled. That last attack screwed up his shoulder, and to add insult to injury, she used the same trick he planned to use against those who went against him. I'm far from done. Issei smiled as she focused her magic again and cast a magic circle. I'm not falling for this again. Diodora growled as he took to the sky to dodge the earth spikes he expected to appear. Actually, you did, Issei smiled as the magic circle appeared above Diodora and a torrent of water slammed him into the ground. Nice, Issei chuckled. A classic fake out and worked like a charm. Issei, you're amazing, Riaz gushed. She was like a whole new person and Diodora was being completely stomped. If she stayed like this, Issei would become a major weapon to her peerage. You bitch, Diodora growled as he got up, still soaked in water. Thank you, but I think it's time to end this. Akeno, do you mind finishing him off? I'm tired of looking at him, Issei smiled, turning towards the sadistic queen. Akeno's eyes lit up when she realized what she was being allowed to do. You you're so good to me, Issei. Akeno purred. Diodora's eyes widened as he realized the same thing. I won't let you, Diodora scowled as he put up a powerful series of shields to protect him. Bad move, Diodora. Sadists like Akeno will only make things worse when you try that, Issei smiled. He's right, and I definitely will, Akeno purred as she upped the ante. As the bolt of lightning dropped, Diodora's shields were destroyed and a powerful bolt of lightning hammered his soaked body. Diodora screamed in pain as the lightning surged through his body. Take that, Issei smiled as she hid the fact she was currently struggling. The sad truth was that she was out of power already, not used to using her powers like that. As for Diodora, his clothes were in tatters and most of his body was covered in electrical burns thanks to Issei's attack. Why you? Diodora stammered as he laid on the floor. He was on his last legs and everyone could see it. If only there was an adorable nun that could heal him of his injuries. Issei smirked. Nice one, Issei, Akeno chuckled, aware of his joke. Diodora was on his last legs and barely able to move, but he wasn't giving up. I'm not done, Diodora scowled as he reached forward to cast a magic circle. Not so fast Diodora, smiling Issei shouted as he sped forward and stomped on his hand, breaking it and causing him to scream in pain. Hhhh, Diodora screamed out. Now say goodbye, Diodora, Issei smiled as he moved backwards and prepared for the final blow, dragon shot. Ooh, Diodora screamed as the dragon shot completely obliterated him, putting an end to his life in an instant. Asia breathed as she tried to relax after exuding so much energy. She would need to work on her stamina and control. Well done, Asia, Issei smiled as he walked over to the nun and gave her a pat on the shoulder. Issei, I know a much better way you can thank me instead of a pat on the shoulder, Asia said in a sultry voice still on the high from earlier. Oh, Myria's blushed. Though Asia Zenobia shouted with approval. Issei was slightly caught off guard, but he kept his cool. Alright Asia, but not right now. I'm curious how the others are doing. Issei smiled. You can leave that to us, Issei. Why don't you go reward my servant for a job well done? Ria smiled. Works for me, Issei shrugged, and he wrapped his arm around Asia and left via a magic circle to return to his home. Hyoudou household. Issei and Asia appeared in the former's room, and Asia had stars in her eyes, so this is the moment. I'm going to finally lose my pesky virginity, Asia said, almost in awe of the situation as she tossed her boots to the side. Who are you and what have you done with Asia? Issei smiled as he tossed his shoes away also. I'm the same Asia as always, but just without the usual repressed feelings. Asia smiled. Oh, Issei asked with intrigue. Yes, and I've been repressing a whole lot of feelings. Asia replied before reaching for her nun habit in order to take it off. Hold on, Asia, Issei smiled. Asia was a bit confused before she realized something. I see. You want to be the one who reveals the holy maiden to the world. Issei could appreciate this new Asia, but that wasn't his plan, not just yet. Issei smiled before walking over to her and putting his hand on her shoulder. What are you? Ahhhhh, Asia screamed as a magic circle appeared on her head and seemed to shatter. I thought so, Issei admitted. What happened, partner? Drake wondered. During their training, Lefay or Valerie cast a spell on Asia in order to get rid of her timid nature. The trigger was probably seeing Diodora and nobody noticed it because it was designed that way. Issei explained. The fact he didn't notice it himself was proof of what an excellent spell it was. And you just got rid of it. Yep, Issei replied as he focused back on Asia, who had a totally different expression. What happened? Asia muttered as she realized where she was. Hello there, Issei smiled, causing Asia to look at her surroundings in shock. What's going on? Why am I here? What happened to the battle? Asia stammered, trying to gather herself. Issei put his hand on her shoulder again to calm her down. What's the last thing you remember? Issei said softly. I remember us arriving on the battlefield and then nothing. Asia muttered. Issei shook his head because it confirmed his thought to answer your questions in order. Lefay put a seal on you sometime during your training that would awaken an inner Asia of sorts. You're here because after destroying Diodora in a fight, all alone by the way, your other self asked if I could take your virginity as a reward for a job well done. Issei explained, causing Asia to blush heavily. I see, and yet I still have my clothes on. Asia said somberly. It's because if I slept with you as you were, I wouldn't be sleeping with Asia Argento. I'd be sleeping with the inner Asia. I don't know what the regular Asia feels, and I chose to respect that. Issei smiled. Asia realized that he did it out of an honor code of sorts and could appreciate that. However, inner Asia wasn't as far off as he realized. What if the outer Asia wanted to sleep with you also? Asia spoke up. Then I'd be glad to do it. Issei smiled. Asia felt herself light up at his approval. I see, Asia replied as she got on her tippy toes and kissed Issei on the lips briefly before pulling back. I accept your feelings, Asia. Issei smiled as his hand left her shoulder and cupped her face lovingly before leaning in to kiss her himself. Lemon start. Since Asia wasn't used to things like this, Issei started off with a tender touch, kissing her softly as he allowed her to get used to the feeling of his lips on her, and he pulled away after a few seconds. How was that, Asia? Issei smiled. It was nice, Asia said bashfully. Yes, but we're just getting started. Issei smiled as he reached for the blue ribbon at Asia's neck and undid it before sliding her tunic down her frame and off her body, revealing a pink bra with frills with matching panties. A surprising choice if he was being honest. President Ria's got them for me as battle underwear. I hope that's okay, Asia said timidly. Issei chuckled at the choice of words. They're fine, Asia, now get on the bed so I can make you feel good. Issei smiled, figuring he'd save stripping her completely naked for later. Okay, Asia said bashfully, getting onto the bed and lying down so Issei could gaze at her body. It was a bit embarrassing, but she kept at it knowing this might be her only chance. Don't be embarrassed, Asia. You look absolutely adorable. Issei smiled happily as he towered over her. Really, but I'm not as busty as Yumi or Akeno, Asia said bashfully. That's okay, Asia. You're just fine as is. Issei smiled as he leaned down and kissed her cheek to start before he started kissing down her right side. This is Asia shuddered, not used to the sensation, and as he arrived at her breasts, Issei kissed them as well. This is just the start, Issei smiled as his trail of kisses continued until it reached just above her snatch, before Issei started kissing up her left side. This feels nice, Asia mumbled as her body was peppered with kisses by Issei, who teased up her body till he arrived at her breasts and teased them again before going back down until he reached her navel and began going after her right side again. The cycle of going up and down her frame continued for a few more rounds as Issei peppered Asia's body with kisses but did nothing else. It was simple but effective. Issei. Stop teasing me, Asia moaned. She was growing more aroused by the minute and she wanted more. Alright. Issei said with a wolfish smile before getting off the bed and standing in front of it with a smile. Asia leaned up to watch Issei undo his tunic, revealing his toned body before taking off his pants, revealing a pair of black boxers and a bulge underneath. Big Asia said bashfully as she noticed the bulge. It's this way because of you. Issei smiled as he walked back towards the bed, eyeing Asia's body with an odd hunger in his eyes. You're lying, Asia said with a blush. I'm not. Issei smiled as he crawled onto the bed again, closing the distance with Asia before adjusting her body so he could undo her bra, something he did with ease. Diodora was a scumbag, but there's no denying you're a beauty. Issei smiled as he began kissing Asia's breasts this time. You're lying, Asia moaned, but she still wrapped her arms around his back, pulling him closer to her body as she dropped back onto the bed. Issei pulled away briefly so he could stare in her eyes. I'm not. I've always stayed away from you because of what you went through, but now I can make up for lost time. Issei smiled as he began a new assault on Asia's body. While his tongue teased her exposed nipples, his right hand trailed down her body before arriving at her panties. Issei. Asia moaned, not used to somebody doing this to her. She was so pure that she didn't even masturbate, and Issei's simple motions were having an effect. There's plenty more where that came from. Issei smiled as he used his right hand to slide her panties off and revealing her soaked snatch to him at last. How embarrassing, Asia said bashfully, her pee finally exposed to his gaze. You have a lovely pee, Asia. I can't wait to claim it later. Issei smiled as he slid 2 fingers into her snatch, eliciting a moan. Ah, now get ready, Asia, because I'm about to start making you scream. Issei smiled as he licked her breasts with his tongue while his fingers teased her snatch. This feels so good. Asia moaned, her cries growing in volume and strength. She was trying to hold back, but Issei was having none of it. Embrace this feeling, Asia. The church would never let you experience the pleasure I can. Issei smiled as he continued his assault on her body. Her trembling form underneath spoke to Issei in a way far different from the others, and he loved it. Seeing the once innocent nun slowly give in to her desires was a beautiful thing. Issei, I'm going to go crazy, Asia moaned. Then go crazy, Asia. Let me show you what pleasure really is. Issei smiled as he added a 3rd finger into the mix. Asia screamed as she finally gave into Issei's assault and came all over him. Wonderful. Issei smiled as he licked Asia's juices off his fingers with a grin on his face. How embarrassing, Asia blushed, seeing the smile on Issei's face at enjoying her fluids. Issei could tease Asia for hours, but it was time to get down to business. It's time, Asia. Issei smiled as he pulled away in order to slide his boxers off, revealing his throbbing member at last. Asia's big eyes seemed to grow even larger at the sight and what it meant for her. It's so big. Will it really fit inside me? Asia mumbled, not expecting Issei to be that large. Let's find out. Issei smiled as he crawled back onto the bed. Be gentle, Issei. This is my first time after all, Asia pleaded as she got into missionary and spread her legs for him. Issei lined himself up with her body with a smile on his face. I will, Issei said warmly before sliding into her warm cavern and into her body. Ah. Asia cried out at the loss of her virginity. She was glad that Valerie's training caused her to lose her hymen, or this would have been far more painful. As it stood, she was experiencing a pain like nothing she'd ever felt before. I'll give you a second, Asia. Issei said warmly, but admittedly it was as much for her as it was him. He was so used to his fun with the kendo club and his other conquests that he had to mentally tone it down for Asia. I'm sorry. Asia said bashfully, instinctively aware of part of the issue being her lack of experience. Issei simply leaned down and gave her a peck on the lips. Don't worry, Asia. Everyone's first time is tough. Issei said warmly. It took a few minutes, but Asia finally got used to his length and looked up at Issei. I'm ready, Asia said softly. Alright, Issei smiled as he put his hands on her hips and began moving slowly inside her using soft thrusts. Ah. Asia moaned with pleasure. The sensation she was feeling far surpassed what he did earlier, and she knew he was more than capable, given how happy the girls around him were. You're really tight, Asia, Issei grunted, trying to move inside her, but finding it more difficult than he expected. You're just big, Issei. Asia cried out. Let's see if this helps, Issei smiled, taking his right hand off her hip and using it to fondle her breasts. Yes. Asia cried out some more as the added simulation made it easier for both of them. There we go. Now I can pick up the pace. Issei smiled as he increased his speed a bit but kept it on a lower level than what he was used to. It was fine for now, but he'd have to get Asia used to a more intense situation. Keep going. Asia cried out, her body slowly succumbing to Issei's faster pace. Don't worry Asia, I'm not stopping until I fill you up. Issei smiled. Yes, Issei. Fill me up with your seed like you do the others. Make me your woman. Asia moaned out, the shyness fading with every thrust. Ever since she became a devil, the sinful instincts that flowed in from the evil pieces clashed with her training as a nun. Thanks to Issei, that blurred line was slowly being destroyed and she was embracing true pleasure. I will Asia. I'm going to make you my woman. Issei said proudly as he continued to move, hammering her pee with each thrust. It didn't take long for Asia to give in. I'm coming. Issei, I'm coming. Asia cried out as her second orgasm of the day arrived. Issei was pleased at Asia getting her release, but now it was time for more. That was amazing Asia, but we're not done. Issei smiled as he grabbed her and flipped their positions, so she was on top. He hadn't come yet, but that didn't matter at this point. Wait. What's going on? Asia wondered. I'm going to let you move Asia. You decide the pace and how good both of us feel. Issei smiled as he put his hands on her hips and lined her up with his throbbing shaft. Oh okay Asia said firmly as she lowered herself onto his shaft, eliciting a small moan at the new feeling. After a second or two Asia began to bounce on his shaft at a languid pace, wanting to enjoy the moment and the new sensations flowing through her body. That's good Asia. Keep moving Issei smiled. But what about you? This can't be good enough Asia wondered. There was no way Issei was okay with this low pace. Don't worry about me Asia. This is about you feeling good. Issei said warmly. Okay Asia said again as she continued to bounce up and down his shaft, enjoying the feeling of simply being inside Issei. Here we go Asia. You feel so good inside me. Issei smiled. This is amazing. Asia said happily. All her life she never felt like she was in control, and now here she was choosing everything. She was with a man she fell for the moment she saw him, and now a new Asia Argento was being unleashed. This is pleasure Asia. This is what everybody craves, and now you're experiencing it yourself Issei smiled happily. I want to feel more. Make me feel more Issei. Asia screamed out. All her shyness was fading, and now she wanted to be reborn. The holy maiden Asia Argento was gone, and now a new Asia was ready to take her place. One that embraced a more sinful way of doing things. One who went after what she wanted. Alright Asia, but don't say I didn't warn you. Issei smiled as he began thrusting up. Yes. 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 This feels so good. Asia cried out. That's right Asia. Embrace the pleasure. Enjoy what my dick is doing to you. This is pleasure. This is what everyone seeks. This is what everyone craves Issei roared. Yes. Asia screamed out. Her body wanted no. Her body needed this. Everyone in her life was using her. The church. Rainer and her team. Even Riaz was using her to some extent and she knew it. But this was for her. This was the first time Asia Argento was deciding something for herself and she needed this. Now it's time. I'm going to bless the new Asia Argento with my seed. Issei smiled. It was cheesy, but it suited the situation perfectly. Bless me Issei. Fill me with your seed. Mark me as your woman again. Asia cried out. Issei was more than happy to do so. Alright Asia, I'm going to fill you up. Issei smiled happily as he increased his speed for one last thrust. I'm coming. Asia cried out as her third orgasm rushed down onto Issei's body. Here we go. Issei roared as his seed rushed into Asia's body, at last filling her to the brim with his cum. That was incredible. Asia cried out as she fell onto his chest, panting from the results of her first time. That was just the beginning. Issei smiled as he wrapped his arm around Asia and allowed her to relax. She deserved it after the day she had. Lemon end. A few days later, a smiling Issei stood with Asia at the start of the line for the three-legged race, with everyone watching them go. Are you ready Asia? Issei smiled. Yes. After what we've been through this is nothing. Asia said confidently. But Issei smiled. The battle with Diodora and his subsequent deflowering seemed to change Asia's mindset for the better, and now the nun was beginning to exude much more confidence. Go Issei, Asia. You can do it Murayama said happily. Hey Issei, once this battle is over, we should totally thank Murayama for making us a team. Asia said with a sinful smile. Issei's eyes widened at the unspoken suggestion, and he wasn't against it at all. Who are you and what have you done with Asia Argento? Issei teased. Asia was about to answer, but the gun to start the race was fired and Issei and Asia took off. To the surprise of very few watching, Issei and Asia won the race, and the pair walked over to their group with smiles on their faces. Congratulations guys, Zenovia said happily as she stood with Irina, Murayama and Katis. Thanks, but we need to borrow Murayama for a second. Issei smiled. Sure, but why? Murayama said curiously. I wanted to thank Murayama for making me and Issei a team. Asia said with a lustful smile that reminded the girls of Issei. Wait, Irina blushed, aware of what they were suggesting. No fair. I wanted to do a threesome with Asia and Issei. Zenobia pouted, speaking out the plan out loud. Luckily nobody outside of their group could hear them. Huh. Murayama stuttered, wondering what the hell just happened. On second thought, how about we give Zenobia her threesome since Murayama is out of it? Issei smiled as he moved towards Zenobia with a grin on his face, just to have his arm taken by Murayama. Let's go, Issei. Murayama said with a blush as she pulled Issei and Asia towards the kendo clubroom to have their threesome. What about us? Zenobia pouted. Asia looked back and smiled. There will be plenty of time for threesomes later, Zenobia. Right now, me and Issei have a girl to reward. Asia smiled as she walked towards the kendo clubroom with a smile on her face. We created a monster, didn't we? Irina said in disbelief. No. Based on what you guys have told me, Asia was always living her life by somebody else's rules, and it drove her crazy. Now she can live by her own rules, and she's clearly going for it. Kata smiled. Good point, and Issei's a master at doing as he pleases, which means she'll be able to explore her new personality as much as she wants with his approval, Irina smiled. Asia was finally able to live her life, and with Issei by her side, she'd love her life also, and in the end. That's the most important thing of all. End of the here. So that's it for today's video, guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.